So now we'll have Desert Hope Treatment Center, Chris Boutté, come up and talk to us about their agency. He'll give us some insight about what they do, what they provide, and any questions you have, feel free. The floor is yours, Chris. Thank you.
All right. You all hear me? All right, cool. So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about what we do at Desert Hope as well as another project that I've started. But yeah, I typed this all out because sometimes I'm like long-winded, so I want to make sure I keep it in time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself as well in here, so bear with me a little bit. But yeah, so my name's Chris Boutté, and I'm the lead alumni coordinator for American Addiction Centers, as well as an addiction and mental health coach. This new project that I've started is called the Rewired. Right now, I'm doing a lot of videos online with just quick tips on how to help improve your mental health. So I'm really, really lucky to be standing here today. I'm very humbled and honored to speak to anybody about mental health, addiction, anything like that, because 5 years ago, I almost died. 5 years ago, I was struggling with a deep depression and multiple forms of anxiety, and I had an addiction to prescription painkillers and alcohol. I was 26 years old, and my mom received a call from the cardiac critical care unit at UMC Health Center, and they told her to come down to Las Vegas as soon as possible because I might not live through the night. At 26 years old, I had congestive heart failure because of my substance abuse, and my life was so miserable that the idea of death was almost comforting. Today, I'm talking to you as a man with almost 5 years sober, and I have an incredible life today. I have a family and friends who love me, and I can actually love them back. I have an 8-year-old son who almost lost his father when he was 3 years old, and now we have an amazing relationship, and I actually have the chance to see him grow up today. The best of all is that I've found purpose in life, and what I do is I take my dark past and my experience, and I use that to give hope to others. I'm in recovery from addiction. I still have anxiety and depression, but my life has never been better. I live a happy and fulfilling life today that I wouldn't change for the world. And I actually wake up every morning with an excitement and passion for life, which is a lot different because I used to go to sleep every single night not wanting to wake up in the morning. I'm here today to be living proof that if you have mental illness, life can get better. Or if you're here because you have a friend or a loved one, family member, and they have mental illness, life can get better for them too. One of the parts that amazes me about my story is that I'm really nobody special. You know, I have no superpowers. I'm just one of the thousands of people in this country who struggles with mental illness. But I decided that I wasn't going to let it run my life anymore. Now I'm in the driver's seat of my own mind, and I'm passionate about helping others do the exact same thing. Now, I want to make it very clear that the second I got sober, everything wasn't all like unicorns and rainbows. When I first got sober, I was still a very angry person. My anxiety, my depression, those things came at me full force. See, I was using a lot of those substances to mask my anxiety and get rid of my depression. So it was very difficult in my first year sober. So when I was about 2 years clean, one of my favorite parties that I always say is a good old-fashioned pity party. So I was hanging out at this pity party at about 2 years clean, and I was working at a normal office job, and I was looking around at everybody, in my office, and they're all making plans to go out and drink on a Friday night, after work to unwind. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, why can't I do that? Why am I different? Why can't I just go out and have a couple drinks after work like the rest of everybody? So, but the crazy thing is that, I don't even know who I was kidding, because if I actually did go out with them to the bar, I had this crippling social anxiety, even with 2 years sober, and if anybody in here has social anxiety, like the thoughts running through my head, it's like, what do I even talk to these people about? Do they even want me here? I wonder what they think of me. And then, maybe I'll tell them this funny joke I heard, or maybe they'll think I'm stupid, and then comes the thought when we put ourselves in those situations, like, why am I even here, So this is a type of anxiety that a lot of people use alcohol and drugs to help us act normal. So I was beginning to become miserable in my own recovery. But then I decided that I was going to get educated about addiction and mental illness to maybe give myself some answers about what was actually happening with me. So rather than just sitting around and saying, why me, I decided to get educated on what I'm actually suffering from. It was at this point in my life where I truly understood that knowledge is power. And one of the things that I do is I try to give knowledge to other people so they can, do what I've done. As it turns out, everything that happened in the first part of my life made me a prime candidate for mental illness and addiction. So I was born in 1985 when medical science wasn't exactly where it's at today. And before I was born, I had an older brother who actually died in my mother's arms just a few days after he was born. So when my mom was pregnant with me, the doctors were prescribing her Xanax, and they didn't really know what could happen. So when I was born, I actually came out of the womb withdrawing from Xanax. So this alone altered my brain development because and it made me already dependent to an addictive substance right when I came out. So when I was about 4 years old, my parents divorced, and I don't know when it happened exactly, but my mom became an alcoholic. I lived with my dad, but I'd visit my mom during school breaks, and I was a big mama's boy, okay? And as a kid growing up, it was very scary and confusing when I'd go to visit my mom and she was constantly putting the alcohol in front of me. She would rather get drunk than spend time with me or show me love and be that mom that I thought she should be. So, as I mentioned, I was a very angry person when I first got sober, and I think a lot of it I got from my mom. She's this little, wiry Sicilian woman, and when she was drinking, that anger really came out. Like, we couldn't even have a Christmas dinner with family without her threatening to fight somebody. So there came a point when I got older where I decided that I was just going to stop visiting my mom. Every time I went out there, she was drunk the whole time, and I just figured that it was a waste of my time. And since I grew up like that and seeing what addiction did to my mom, I swore that I was never going to touch alcohol or drugs. But clearly, because I'm standing here today, that didn't go so well for me. So come to find out, having a mother who was an alcoholic put me in the highest possible risk factor for developing an addiction. There's studies that show that children who grow up with not just their parents, but even a caregiver who has a substance abuse problem, they have an 80% chance of developing a substance abuse problem themselves. Not only that, but there are other social and behavioral issues associated with children of alcoholics. Years ago, a couple decades ago, a woman by the name of Janet G. Wojtitz studied adult children of alcoholics, and she found that we develop a slew of different issues. So here are some of them. Seeking approval from others and losing our identity in the process. We're also more prone to enter and stay in verbally or physically abusive relationships. We're likely to fall in love with people who we think we can rescue. We often have feelings of guilt when we stand up for ourselves. We overly develop a sense of responsibility and would rather help others than help ourselves. There are many other symptoms, but these are the ones that I most identified with when I actually read this book and found out, what it meant to be an adult child of an alcoholic. So when you combine these factors with the fact that most people develop mental illness between the ages of 14 and 24, it's no wonder that I developed mental illness myself, which later turned into an addiction. And with that being said, too, I'd like to thank everybody who's here today for coming out because, one of the biggest reasons that so many people don't get help for mental illness is because people aren't educated on that fact. And some of the people speaking right before me were talking about that. We don't know how to deal with loved ones who have mental illness. So anybody who's here getting educated about this stuff or even just helping to increase the awareness, it's awesome that you're here. So back in high school, even though I was a class clown and a jock and I had a ton of friends, I always felt like I was an outsider. I'd often look at the other kids in high school and I would just ask myself, I'd say, how can they be so happy and why can't I do that, right? And then I would wonder, does everybody's brain run at like 1,000 miles per minute the way mine does? And I didn't understand how everybody could seem so calm, even when like something as small as a test was coming up, and I felt like this feeling of impending doom, right? So the bottom line was that, or it still is rather, that we're not teaching our children about the importance of good mental health, and this does nothing but increase the stigma. So, like they were mentioning, I work at a drug and alcohol treatment center, and part of one of my groups is I'll ask everybody in the room, I say, how many of you took a mental health class when you were in high school? or middle school, and almost everybody raises their hands. And then I ask them, I say, okay, how many of you learned about, what foods to eat, the right exercise, safe sex, diseases, all those things, and everybody raises their hands. And then I say, okay, now how many of you learned about what the symptoms of mental illness look like? How many of you were talked about what depression looks like, what anxiety looks like, what PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia? And almost all of the hands go down. So even though we have these health classes in school, a lot of people aren't learning what to look for. So I have had some clients from the far Northeast, and they actually did learn about some of this stuff. So I think some parts of the country might be doing a little bit better about this than we are. But every now and then, actually the point I'm trying to make is that, so since we're not educating people about these symptoms, there's a lot of people like myself, and what my personal experience was, is that I was very scared and confused when these symptoms started to arise. So with that being said, not learning about this stuff when I was in school, could you imagine me being, a football player, going up to one of the guys on my football team and just asking him and said, hey, do you ever wake up in the morning just extremely sad and not want to get out of bed and not want to, go out into the world today? The guy on my football team would look at me like I'm a lunatic. So because of that, what we do is we internalize it and we don't tell anybody about it. So this is a very real scenario that's happening to thousands and thousands of our young people as well as adults as I'm standing here today. And some of you who are in here, you might be dealing with something similar. Now, what happened to me was I ended up turning to alcohol at the end of my senior year after I broke up with one of my high school sweethearts. And, she actually broke up with me. And I fell into this deep, dark depression. And when I got drunk for the first time, 100% of my problems went away. Now, the leading cause of addiction, it's not peer pressure, it's not drugs coming in from other countries, and it's definitely not because people with addictions are bad people. The two leading causes of addiction are untreated and undiagnosed mental illness. Those two things right there. Since people don't know about mental illness, our primitive instincts kick in, and we're biologically designed to find anything that will increase dopamine in our brains when we're feeling bad. And oftentimes, unfortunately, people find that through drugs or alcohol. So when I was 20 years old, my addiction was getting worse, and my mom decided she was going to leave her husband to get sober. And even though I was still in my addiction, I remember talking to my mom, and I can hear a change in her voice. And she came down to visit me, and I can see that she was a completely different person. But I wasn't ready to get well yet. So a few years later, my son was born, and my addiction was so powerful that even though I thought I could stop for him, I couldn't. And by the time I got sober, my son's mom refused to let me even see him. In June of 2012 was when my mom got that dreadful call that I might not live through the night. Now, with my mom at this time being 7 years sober and already have lost a son, I can't even imagine the pain that I was putting her through. So the following morning in the hospital, my mom, my aunt, my son's mom, and my best friend, they were by my hospital bed, and they were just begging me to stop. They're like, Chris, don't do this. You have a lot to live for. Get well. You have a son. And even to this day, it's one of my most painful memories because I remember looking at my family and my friends, and they're crying, begging me to stop, and I was telling them to just give up on me. There's no helping a guy like me. Just let me die, right? And in my sick thinking, I thought that my son would be better off with a father who passed away rather than growing up with an addict for a father like I grew up with, right? So luckily, my family didn't give up on me. My mom dragged me out to California to get sober, and I can honestly say that the hardest part about getting sober wasn't not drinking and not using drugs, but it was finding the willingness to live. So I used to go to sleep every night in my addiction hoping that I wouldn't wake up in the morning. And once drugs and alcohol were gone, the anxiety and depression hit me even harder than they had in a long time. And it's kind of crazy how today I work at this treatment center called Desert Hope, because I often say that hope is the only reason that I'm standing here today. I received hope by surrounding myself with men and women who had been through what I'd been through, but they live an incredible life now. I heard about people who hit rock bottoms. They hit worse rock bottoms than I did, but they had this new passion for living. I met people who were homeless, who were jobless, who were divorced, who had mental illness. I even met people who had lost family members, even children. But they had this peace and this serenity and this sanity. And I looked at these people and I was like, I want that. So when I looked at these people, the interesting thing that I noticed is that they had this happiness about them that was completely independent of the circumstances going on in their life. And to me, that's what the dream is. Not letting, because life throws so many things at us, how can I be happy no matter what life brings my way? Because I didn't go into my recovery believing that everything was going to be perfect. I knew things were going to happen, but I needed to know how to deal with them better. So, much like me, these people were completely normal people, and they were just tired of living the way that they were living. And they had decided to put in the work and make a change. So the statistic that blows my mind the most about addiction and relapse is that anybody with an addiction actually has a better chance of never relapsing than people with diabetes, hypertension, or cancer. So when I sit there and I look at illnesses like that, I can't help but ask myself, why do so many people not take care of their mental health and end up relapsing? And the answer is very simple. We get in our own way. So a few weeks ago, I went to California to visit one of my best friends in the world. I've known her for years. She actually stuck with me through my addiction, and she gets to see who I am today. I got to visit her with my son. And this woman, she has done everything right in her life. So she eats well, she exercises, she doesn't smoke, and as far as karma goes, she is one of the most loving, kind individuals I've ever met. But since she was a teenager, she's had cancer come back 3 times, all right? And when I was down there a few weeks ago, I was talking to her, I said, wouldn't it be amazing if a doctor came up to you and said, hey, just go to some 12-step meetings, maybe go have some talk therapy, practice this thing called mindfulness, and I can guarantee you that cancer will never come back. I was like, wouldn't you do it? And she's like, of course I would do it, right? So she doesn't have that luxury that some of us with mental illness actually have. She has something that's coming back regardless of what she does. So that's another reason why I try to relay this message of hope, because mental illness is something that we can all overcome. So working at American Addiction Centers, I have the honor and privilege of working with men and women who are just like me. Men and women who are struggling with mental illness and addiction who want a better life for themselves and their families. So as the lead alumni coordinator, I get to stay in touch with people all over the country as they go through their recovery and get their lives back, get their families back, get their children back, and get all these gifts that I received. So after treatment, for all of the alumni who stay here in Las Vegas, I do a weekly 12-step meeting. We do different events. With this new lease on life that we've all been given, we go out and we do fun stuff. We've gone to GameWorks, we've gone go-kart racing, we've gone to Wet and Wild, but we also do different events where we give back to the community. So I have a few alumni who came out here today. Later this month, we're actually doing a donation event for WestCare, and we do that as a way to give back. So earlier this year, I also started doing online videos, as I mentioned, to help people with mental illness. And this project's called the Rewire. Throughout learning about addiction and mental illness, I found out that science has proven that with mindfulness, we can actually begin to rewire our brain. Not only has mindfulness helped improve my recovery, but it's also helped decrease my symptoms of depression and anxiety. And the insane thing is too, I'm happy 99% of the time, and that's crazy living here in Las Vegas with all this construction going on and getting stuck in traffic, you know what I mean? So if you only receive one message from me today, I just want it to be, don't lose hope, all right? Myself, all of the other mental health professionals here, our team at American Addiction Centers, all of our American Addiction Centers alumni, and many others are here for you. If a guy like me can go from being a depressed, angry, and addicted guy to this guy who's living this amazing life today, literally anybody can do it. So yeah, that's all I got. Feel free to come by our booth and get some more information. And like Sharita was mentioning, we do have a Snapchat filter if any of you are using that. And thanks, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.